Story 1. When I was in my early 20s, my mentally ill brother disappeared with a family friend. The family friend was a middle-aged man going through a divorce who had been supportive of my brother. Initially, we assumed they had gone on an unplanned camping trip. Days went by, and with no word, everyone became worried. My parents tracked him down, finding him camping on the streets of Portland several hours away. They picked him up and brought him home. I remember sitting in the kitchen with my parents and my brother, trying to get information from him about what had happened and where the family friend was. There were no clear answers, and what we were hearing was worrisome. My parents stepped out to call the police, leaving my brother and me alone in the kitchen. I took the opportunity as his older brother to get him to open up. I remember little of what was said except one sentence burned into my memory. He said that he had smashed him. After that night, there were years of turmoil, including multiple escapes by my brother from correctional and mental health institutions. About 20 years later, my brother is a ward of the state for life and the body has never been found. That confession haunts me to this day. Story 2. 8 months ago, my dad was sitting at my dining room table. He was out of breath and said he felt strange. He insisted on waiting to see what was wrong, but after a few minutes without improvement, he said he wanted to go to an urgent care facility. We ran out the door and got in my car, and about halfway to the doctor he said, "Whoa, I just got very lightheaded." I asked him how his hands and feet felt. He said they were tingly and sore. I shifted into high gear and sped at 110 miles per hour in a 40 miles per hour zone past the urgent care and drove straight to the emergency room. They wheeled him in immediately, attached adhesive monitoring pads, and he was in ventricular tachycardia with a heart rate of 188 beats per minute. The nurse escorted me out while another nurse wheeled the crash cart into his room. The last thing I saw was my dad, pale as death, lying back on a stretcher as they prepared to defibrillate him. The nurse told me we were going to take a walk. I thought we were going to wait in the waiting room. Instead, he took me to the family consultation room, a small room with big plush chairs and calming paintings of fields and countrysides. I was terrified. He was having a massive heart attack. He has since had coronary artery bypass grafting, open heart surgery, and is doing much better. I had never been more scared. The strangest part was that I was calm and collected the whole time until the nurse brought me back into his room once he was stable and waiting to wake up. That was when I broke down. Story 3. Last year, I watched my 9-year-old daughter die. She was physically disabled and had lung problems. She had pneumonia not long before and had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. She was discharged the week before, and then she stopped breathing. She had no pulse for 15 minutes, which caused devastating brain damage. We withdrew life support 4 days later, and I stayed by her side until she passed. Scenes from the day she stopped breathing and her passing still flash into my brain at the worst times. She was supposed to turn 10 in 2 days. Instead, she is gone. It's not fair. Story 4. I experienced an 8.8 magnitude earthquake while on the 9th floor of a high-rise building. Story 5. Heading north on Route 83 in Pennsylvania late at night and into the early morning. Southbound, I saw a pickup with a trailer stopped and the trailer on fire. The driver was inconsolable. Under the trailer was a motorcycle. About 25 yards up the road was a human-sized bump. I rushed up and the rider was critically injured. He was gurgling and twisted in many horrifying positions. I knew I should not have moved him for medical reasons, but it was dark and late and there was no way to alert oncoming traffic, so I pulled him to the shoulder and sat on the ground with him. Several people stopped. One was a registered nurse who propped his head up and tried to clear his airway. He gurgled until the ambulance arrived. When they loaded him onto a backboard and the headlights revealed the extent of his injuries, it was truly unimaginable to see a human in that shape. The next day, the news reported he died at the local hospital. I still think the last faces he might have seen were a bunch of strangers on the side of the road. Story 6. I was in the army and deployed to Afghanistan. It was my second day there. I had not yet been sent to the camp I would go to a few days later. We were living in large 200-person tents across a dirt road from the porta-johns and the smoking area. I went out to use the restroom, opened the porta-john, and there was suddenly a shot. One of the soldiers in my unit had his M4 carbine in his mouth and had fired it. He blew away the front of his face. I was hit in the face with blood and bone and went blind for a few seconds from the blood in my eyes. I had to sit for hours and be interviewed by everyone you do not want to meet in your unit. The Criminal Investigation Division, the battalion commander, the division commander, and the commander of Bagram Airfield. Half the people thought I had something to do with it or knew something about it. A couple of days later, the investigation produced a different story. The weekend before we deployed, he had gotten drunk and proposed to a stripper at her workplace. Apparently she said yes, but a week later she told him that a man had been harassing her. So she had agreed just to get him to leave her alone. She did not know him and did not want anything to do with him. He took his rifle, found a round, went to the porta-john and shot himself. The worst part is he did not hit his brain. He destroyed the front of his face. The blast left him blind and deaf, and a bone fragment that hit his spine left him paralyzed. He now requires around-the-clock specialized care from his family just to stay alive. I cannot believe someone would do that to themselves over a woman they had just met. He was 18. Story 7. More than 1,200 gallons of raw sewage backed up into my basement over 12 hours on a Sunday afternoon, while the city sewer workers did little or nothing to help. It is a long story, but to summarize, I live on a literal border between two cities. Our neighborhood is unusual in that only my street is part of one city, but I pay my sewer taxes to the other city. One day the toilet was acting up and we realized sewage was coming up through a drain in the basement. We called a plumber who quickly determined this was not our problem. It was Sunday afternoon on a gorgeous day and, of course, no city worker wanted to come out. While we were trying to get the city to fix things, the plumber asked if we wanted him to call a friend who does hazardous materials clean up, and thank goodness we did because those workers saved our house. All afternoon the hazardous materials crew pumped out the sewage, which was up to our knees, while the city sewer employees tried to find the clog but could not, so they left and abandoned us. I called the city repeatedly, pleading about what was happening, and they kept insisting it was not their problem. It was ours. After 8 hours of this, at that point over 800 gallons had drained out of our basement with more constantly flooding in. I called my real estate agent for advice and he contacted a friend in the mayor's office. Only then did the city decide to mobilize. Both city sewer departments worked on the issue and managed to resolve it fairly quickly. And all I received was a half-hearted apology from a sewer supervisor in a Hawaiian shirt who was upset he had to leave a baseball game to deal with the sewage. The damages exceeded $10,000. And it took months to receive a check to start repairs. It was easily one of the worst days of my life. Story 8. This may not compare to other stories I have read here, but the most terrifying experience of my life was the 60 seconds between my daughter being born and when she started breathing. I am a 48-year-old married father of 2. She had the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck and was in distress at birth. I have lived 3 full lifetimes, each seemingly the same length. The 38 years before my daughter was born. The 60 seconds between her birth and when she started breathing. The rest of my life since then. Story 9. Getting a massive head wound after being pistol whipped in an armed robbery while working the night audit shift by myself at a hotel. I was a 20-year-old woman. There were 5 of them. I always wondered if they enjoyed the $62 they got away with. The last thing I remember was saying the safe is on a 10-minute timer. I woke up bleeding from the head. The front desk was trashed. The sleeve of my jacket was torn off, and there were coins everywhere. It was obvious what had just happened. I woke to a man who had been staying in our hotel for about 3 months standing over the desk. He had an unlit cigarette hanging from his mouth and he asked if we had any matches. Story 10. An active shooter is on a subway car. People have nowhere to go. Some are jumping onto the tracks. The scene is chaotic. Story 11. I was shot at by gang members in Wilmington, Los Angeles. A bullet struck my friend in the head while he was driving. He survived, but it was a very frightening experience. Story 12. My brother once came into my room and threw me on the bed. He stood behind me and tried to pull my pants down. I resisted and flailed with my hands. He drew a knife and screamed at me to be quiet. The knife pierced my hand. He was shocked, drew back the knife and backed away. I ran down the stairs, bleeding profusely. My mother was in a session downstairs with her therapist. The therapist gave me a towel and drove me to the hospital, while my brother followed with my mother in his car. In the emergency room, my mother blamed me for the incident. She said it was my fault and that I had provoked my brother by wearing one of his t-shirts. All I remember from being there, aside from that comment, was looking at my hand and thinking how strange the inside looked where the skin had split. Abusive families really do have their way of messing with you, I suppose. Story 13. I was with my dad when he died of congestive heart failure. Felt like drowning slowly from the inside. I watched him and my mom say goodbye after 51 years of marriage as he passed away. He opened his eyes for the first time in a week, made solid eye contact, and then died. Witnessing that and holding that mental image caused me stress for years until the memory faded. A family friend who was a hospice nurse said it was one of the most difficult deaths she had seen. He did not want to go. Story 14. I was in an accident and was hit by a semi-truck. I am so lucky to be alive. It definitely put me in a deep depression, and I struggled mentally and physically for 3.5 years. Story 15. I ignored my sleep apnea for years. My wife would hear me stop snoring and stop breathing for minutes at a time and would panic and shake me. I had no recollection, so I figured it was not a big deal. One night, I heard a loud voice that sounded like my own yelling, "Wake the fuck up, dumbass. You are not breathing." When I woke up, I realized that not only was I not breathing, but I could not breathe. It took every bit of effort to stand up and force my breathing to start again. I finally took it seriously and got the old continuous positive airway pressure machine. Story 16. I was robbed at Domino's when a man grabbed me, beat me up, and took my wallet that had no money in it and the pizza. I was robbed at gunpoint at another Domino's, which was even more frightening. Then I had a left-sided stroke at age 35, which was terrifying. Story 17. I was 16. I woke up at 4 a.m. to my mother screaming my name. She, her boyfriend, and his brother had been drinking, and I had begged them all night to stop as my little brother and I tried to sleep. I checked my brother, told him to hide in the closet, and ran downstairs. There was broken glass everywhere. My mother's large, bald boyfriend, who was drunk, was strangling her. I did not know what to do, so I started hitting his back and screaming for him to stop. We got him off my mother, and she chased him out, but she insisted on continuing to fight with him instead of closing the door and calling the police. She attacked me and beat me when I tried to get her to stop and come back inside. I called the police, worried my phone would die in the middle of the call. The police came and took all the adults away, and social workers asked if there was anywhere they could take my brother and me. I said I was not leaving. I just wanted them to get out of our house so I could clean up and put my brother back to bed. Of course, they did not listen to me because I was just a child, or I should have been just a child, but I had learned to take care of things. In the end, the police dragged me out of the house, and the social workers took my brother and me away. Later, I was woken by my mother's call. She screamed at me, calling me a worthless liar who had ruined everything. Story 18. I was walking home when a car with 4 or 5 large men slowed down, rolled down the window, and started harassing me. They catcalled me, saying things like, "Let me fuck you, babe, and don't ignore me, bitch. I know you can hear me." Luckily, I was near my apartment and ran to the guardhouse. I was 14 or 15 years old. Story 19. I was about 8 years old at the dentist to have 5 teeth pulled. For whatever reason, the local anesthesia did not work and I felt far too much pain. I had never experienced pain like that. The older dentist did not believe me and thought I was being a baby as I screamed, bucked, and begged for more numbing. My parents said they could hear me screaming from the waiting room. When I told them what happened, they were horrified. I am pretty sure that was the last time I went to that dentist. A few weeks ago, I had a skin graft and opted for nitrous oxide because they assured me it works well and has minimal recovery time. I experienced panic, terror, and episodes of delusion on and off throughout the procedure. I did not become violent, but I felt like I was in a waking nightmare. When I explained my experience afterward, they said that was not how it was supposed to be and asked me to avoid nitrous oxide in the future. Story 20. I have had a few. I am a hospice nurse. Once I went on a house call in the middle of the night to a dying but not yet deceased patient who had hundreds of maggots in his nose and mouth. I removed and killed over 100 while calmly speaking to his very sweet and loving partner, assuring her it was not her fault and that he was not suffering. I made the mistake of shining a flashlight into his mouth before I left and saw there were hundreds more. Inside I was screaming and felt like my spirit was tearing in two, having to act calm in such a horror movie nightmare situation. The sight haunted me for a long time and I am sure I will never forget it. He did not die for another 36 hours after my visit and I could not rest until he did. Story 21. I had a friend who drank a lot, to the point where he could be extremely intoxicated and still appear sober. I made the mistake of getting a ride with him once when I did not know he was drunk. He was driving about twice the speed limit, swerving and running red lights, even though I was screaming at him to stop. As soon as he reached a light where he had to stop, I ran out of the car. Story 22. Finding someone I loved dearly who had overdosed on fentanyl was terrifying. They were unresponsive, not breathing, without a pulse, face pale and lips blue. I thought they were dead. I did not panic. I went into crisis mode. I knew they struggled with addiction and we live in an area where it is rampant. I administered naloxone, commonly known as Narcan, and they took a deep breath and regained consciousness, disoriented, almost immediately. Everyone should carry naloxone. It saves lives. They likely would have died if I had not had it. How lifeless they looked will always haunt me. I do not think the nightmares or flashbacks will ever fully go away. Sometimes panic sets in at irrational times. Story 23. I was in a car accident with my girlfriend. She had just bought the car 2 weeks prior, and I was driving. We were sitting at a red light when we heard tires screeching behind us and someone plowed into the back of us going at least 50 miles per hour. They hit us hard enough that it sent our car barreling into the vehicle in front of us. When we finally stopped, I looked up to see red spatter all over the dashboard and was afraid to look at my girlfriend for a few seconds. I heard her screaming. After about 3 seconds, I looked at her and, to my relief, she was fine, just really scared by what happened. I had forgotten she had brought a can of cheer wine with her when we went out. The driver who hit us took off before we could get our bearings. Multiple people stopped and asked if we were okay and gave us descriptions of the car and driver. I know they meant well, but every person who stopped gave a different description, so it did not do us or the police much good. They still have not caught the person, as far as I know. She still suffers from post-traumatic symptoms from that. When she is in the passenger seat and we stop, I still see her checking the mirrors and watching people behind us almost constantly. She is afraid to drive, and that happened in June last year. Story 24. My 3-year-old daughter drowned in a public pool while my now ex-wife was 85 feet away eating pizza. I was at work. Fortunately, there was an emergency room doctor at the pool, and with cardiopulmonary resuscitation he restored her breathing. She is now 20 and was not harmed by the event. I thought about it every day for years. It is one of the reasons I am no longer married to my ex-wife. Story 25. I have never liked boating. My boyfriend at the time insisted we go whitewater rafting in separate boats. I flipped over in a bad eddy and was trapped under the raft. I thought I was going to drown. Story 26. I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name while I was alone in the house. I remained frozen in bed, too terrified to move, convinced I was not alone. Story 27. 1. A man said an inappropriate sexual comment to my 2-year-old niece, then laughed when he saw how shocked I was. 2. A man on the other side of the road shouted, "I'm going to kill you," and then sprinted toward me. I've never run so fast in my life. It was ages before I felt like I was actually going to survive. 3. I witnessed a car accident. A motorcyclist collided with a car, flew over it, and landed on the other side. He had a piece of bone sticking out of his leg and kept trying to get up. Someone ran over and immediately took his helmet off, which seemed like a bad move in case he had a neck injury. I suggested they leave it on, but the person taking it off said he was a doctor. I think about these all the time. Story 28. My 4-year-old son had a habit of announcing when he needed the bathroom. He would say, "I gotta go potty." One time he announced he needed to go and headed to the bathroom. He returned seconds later and said, "There's already someone in the bathroom." I knew it was just the two of us, so my hair stood up. I asked him what he meant. He repeated, "There's already someone in the bathroom." I imagined something out of a movie, like seeing a ghost or someone in a hockey goalie mask. I grabbed the largest knife from the knife block and told him to stay put. I walked to the bathroom, peered inside, and saw no one. I slowly moved toward the shower and pulled back the curtain. Nothing. By then my son had walked around the corner. I asked him where he saw the person. He pointed to an unflushed toilet and said, "See, someone's already here." His older brother hadn't flushed the toilet. Story 29. I was in labor for 57 hours and 39 minutes. Story 30. I was snorkeling a few miles off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a Boy Scout excursion at Sea Base. While snorkeling, my father had a heart attack and I had to watch him drown. We eventually flagged down a fishing boat and got his body on board. I performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation until the Coast Guard arrived. They took him away in a speedboat and the fishing boat brought me back to shore. When we arrived, the entire area had police cars and other emergency vehicles. I knew, even before I talked to the police chief, that he had died. I was 15. Story 31. I realized someone had put something in my drink as it started to hit. I was in a club and could not move my legs or understand what was happening around me. I am a lifelong stoner and I immediately thought that this was bad drugs. So I found the closest gross couch and collapsed on it. I am so grateful my friends noticed that I was not on the dance floor and got me home. I had to crawl up the stairs to my house on all fours and was sick until sunrise. I only have a scattered handful of memories of where I threw up on the way home. I woke up on the bathroom floor safe and unharmed, with a blanket, my favorite stuffed animal, and a bottle of water that my friends had left for me. I am an atheist, but God bless the women who look after one another. I do not set my drink down for photos anymore. Story 32. This happened around March and still creeps me out. After exams were over, my friends and I decided to meet up and watch a movie we had all been waiting for. Next to the mall is a multi-level parking garage. We had been to the roof before. It was an open space, and the first time we were there was in early winter. It was high enough for a perfect view, and we had a great time taking pictures of the sunset, playing games, and such. At that time it had been open to the public because the elevator went up to the top floor, and around sunset a few more people would come up to watch. So this time we planned to go there after the movie. We even packed waffles and brownies to eat while enjoying the sunset like last time. It was obvious the place was kind of shady. Near the parking garage was a small garden area where homeless people or people on drugs usually hung out. The first time we were on the roof we found used needles, broken bottles, and trash, but we didn't really care. This time when we tried to go up, the button to the 6th floor had been removed. We went to the 5th floor and took the stairs to the 6th. The door had a metal lock around its handles, but since someone had broken the glass, we decided to go in anyway. It was clear the authorities did not want people going up there, but we crawled through the small hole in the glass. As planned, we were having a great time. At one point, my 3 friends climbed a ramp and sat there while I walked close to the railing, looking down at the garden. I know it was stupid. About 10 minutes later, 2 men came up to the roof. I hadn't noticed them until one of my friends loudly called out to me, saying he had to show me something. As soon as I climbed the ramp, he asked if I was okay, which caught me off guard. All 3 of my friends looked panicked. I brushed it off as them being paranoid. The same friend suggested we leave, and I suggested we stay, saying the men were probably just there to drink and we should leave them alone. While we argued, our other friends said the men kept looking at us and talking on their phones. That was creepy, and after some convincing, we all decided it was better to be safe than sorry. Before we could climb down the ramp, 5 more men came upstairs. After meeting with the other 2, they started to head toward us. There was only one way up or down the ramp, and I swear I saw one of them holding something that looked like a knife. They were definitely heading toward us. It was the 4 of us against 7 grown men. They climbed the ramp and surrounded us. Thankfully, a friend of mine, who used her head, started to apologize profusely, asking them not to tell her father she was up there because he was a police officer who would be upset. Her father is not actually a police officer. We pretended to believe they were some sort of authority, there to remove us for trespassing, and made up stories that our parents were about to pick us up and would be very angry. That seemed to throw them off and they backed away. As soon as they did, we bolted. We ran down the stairs, did not look back, and swore never to go back. My friends later told me that when the first two men saw me, they had started to walk toward me, and when my friend called out, it startled them because they probably did not know I was not there alone. Story 33. Watching my great-grandmother pass away. She had stage 4 lung cancer, diagnosed very late. She was receiving end-of-life morphine and was essentially comatose. I am not a medical professional, so I may be using imperfect terminology. We had to turn her, clean her, and assist with basic care. She had not opened her eyes in days. I woke that morning while staying overnight to help care for her and went to check on her and say good morning. There was mucus coming from her mouth and nose. I had never seen death or anyone close to me die, but for some reason I knew. I removed her nasal cannula and cleaned her. I woke my grandparents. As soon as my grandfather was at her bedside, she reached out, grabbed his hand, sat up straight, looked into his eyes, lay back down, and took her last breath. I am not sure whether watching this wonderful woman die was harder, or witnessing my grandfather repeatedly place his hands on her chest, insisting he could still feel her heartbeat. Story 34. A police officer and a chaplain came to my door around noon on Halloween. They told me they had found a body and identified it as my son. Story 35. I had a lucid dream in which I was shot multiple times in the head and chest. Despite my forehead exploding, I continued the dream. Story 36. First, a suicide. A woman drove her car into a tree at 90 kilometers per hour. The speedometer jammed at the impact speed. The crime scene team investigated the vehicle path. We had to get her out of the car to ensure there was no foul play. Every bone from her midriff down was visibly broken. Blood poured from her nose and ears as we moved her onto a tarp. We had to check her hands for signs of a struggle, but her hands remained clenched and resisted our attempts to open them. I already had post-traumatic stress disorder, and this made things worse. Small triggers such as people crossing their legs, dangling a foot, loud eating, or girls in cotton tights made me instantly angry or nauseated. I was dating someone who turned out to be narcissistic. She made the whole thing about herself, leaving no room for sympathy. If I broke down in private, she screamed at me and made things worse. Beyond the survivor's guilt that lasted about 4 years, I had a recurring nightmare in which I returned to the crash scene with friends in her place and had to relive it all again with someone I knew. So on a selfish note, if you are contemplating suicide, just remember that some poor bastard has to find you and figure out how and why you did it. Story 37. I forgot who I was. I had been under tremendous stress, partly because my former wife had run off with her boyfriend and partly because my job had become impossible. I lay down for a while, and when I stood up, everything was black. I could not see anything. I had no idea where I was, and worse, I had no memory of who I was. I could not remember my name or anything from my past. I knew I must be a person in some physical place, but it was all unknown to me. The fact that I could no longer see any light made it difficult to figure anything out. Story 38. After being with a cruel narcissist, you never look at people the same way anymore, especially when they display red flags or triggers. Story 39. I was very nearly kidnapped at 14. I watched so much true crime. It is kind of weird to think about how close I came to being one of those victims. I still have nightmares about it now, at 30. I was walking home. My 17-year-old boyfriend was too scared to walk with me because he was afraid of walking in the dark alone. The area where I lived in Spain at the time was a new, modern neighborhood on the outskirts of town. I had two options to get home. About a 15-minute walk along the old main road, now the back road into town, very winding with tall trees and no streetlights but tarmac, or the dirt road, 8 minutes and straight but often used by drug users and assumed to be more dangerous. He walked me to the corner of the main road. We said goodbye and I set off walking. I was about halfway up when I heard a car coming from behind me. It was going way too fast, and they must have had the windows down because I could hear men's voices shouting. I remember feeling unnerved and all the hairs on my body standing up, but I did not turn around. I just kept going. Then the car came speeding in front of me and swerved across the road to block my path. They were maybe 10 meters ahead of me. Four men jumped out of the car. I heard beer bottles clinking and laughter, but it was not joyful. It was menacing. I turned on my heel and ran back toward town. I heard them shout and start running after me. I was in slip-on high heels, running in the middle of the road, hoping I did not fall on a branch or get hit by a car or, worst of all, that they would catch me. I made it back to the streetlights. My boyfriend was just walking into view. He said he had had a really bad feeling and had come back to check on me. He walked me home. The men were gone, but the tire tracks were still there. I never told anyone else about this for years. I have never told my parents. A 16-year-old went missing from the same town a couple of years before me. It is a big case in Spain because it is so rare for something like that to happen there. It haunts me, wondering if it was the same men and if that is what happened to her. I have also been date raped and sexually assaulted multiple times, but honestly that is not as horrifying for me. Story 40. I was an aid worker in an African country. I was hit by shrapnel from an improvised explosive device and was then arrested on suspicion of being a terrorist while fleeing from actual terrorists. While in prison, I contracted malaria, which made me think demons were trying to eat my eyeballs. Story 41. This happened only last week. I was walking home from the bus stop to my apartment when someone followed me, tried to get my attention, then chased me into my building with a weapon, a short metal pole with a grip handle. He said he had come out of prison and that he would kill me unless I emptied my pockets. He took my phone and threatened me until I gave him the passcode. All of this happened inside the stairwell of my building. I am still reeling from it and find it difficult to walk around after dark. Story 42. I woke in the middle of the night and could not breathe for several minutes. I was awake long enough to walk to the bathroom, wake my wife, and begin dialing emergency services, but I became too dizzy and disoriented to complete the call. I thought I was dying. My wife did not know what was happening and stood with a terrified look, trying to understand why I had jumped out of bed, returned, and shaken her awake without speaking. I did not see my life flash before my eyes, but I kept alternating between worrying about how it would affect our children and trying to stop it. Finally, as everything went dark and I was losing my balance, I began to get a faint amount of air through my nose. I focused on that and calmed myself. After a few minutes, I could inhale enough to force a strong exhalation through my mouth, which opened my throat, and I was able to breathe normally again. I went to the emergency room and they found nothing wrong. Story 43. Watching my mom slowly die from congestive heart failure and related complications was torture. The last 3 months of her life felt like hell because she did not want to die. Her will to live amazed me, and I will never forget how hard she fought during those 3 months. Her whole body was so swollen with fluid that her skin began to split on her arms and legs. She went into cardiac arrest and was placed on a ventilator, and she could not breathe without it, so they had to place a tracheostomy tube. She could not eat or talk and was given a feeding tube through her stomach, a gastrostomy tube. Because she could not speak, we tried to lip read, and most times I could not understand her. It was so sad and frustrating. Even on the ventilator, she still felt she could not breathe. Her anxiety was severe because of that feeling and her fear of dying, and my visits to the hospital were unbearable because I could not stand to see her so scared and helpless. It broke me and tore me apart. She begged me not to leave at every visit, and I will never forget the look of worry and panic when I had to go. When she was not awake and having panic attacks, she was medicated with Valium and Trazodone for her anxiety. I welcomed those visits even though she was deeply asleep, because at least she was resting and had some peace. Her liver and kidneys began failing. Nothing could be done. She went into cardiac arrest a second time, and they brought her back using defibrillator paddles. She had burn marks on her chest and was in a lot of pain. After that, she finally agreed to a do not resuscitate order. She held on for another month in pain and with even more anxiety, and then decided it was finally time. She agreed to stop all medical intervention. I could not mentally handle watching her die, but the rest of my family stayed by her side. Once they removed the ventilator, she did not last 10 minutes. My sister said it was extremely traumatizing to watch her go. I miss her so much. She never deserved to go through that. She was only 64. I pray that she is at peace. Story 44. I was in the United States Army for 5 years. About 4.5 years in, I was on charge of quarters, a 24-hour barracks watch. It was a shift where another soldier and I kept watch over the barracks. Around 5:30 p.m., I went out for a smoke and noticed a man on top of the 4-story building beside me. That was not unusual. We sometimes went up to the roof after work to drink a few beers, tan, and relax. I waved and said hello, but he ignored me. At first it looked like he was adjusting his headphones, but I soon realized he was fidgeting with his bootlaces and had tied them together. He was preparing to hang himself. I got to the roof by offering to share my cigarettes when he ran out, and I ended up sitting on the ledge with him for another 6.5 hours. Keep in mind, it is the United States military and full of wild people. Some from my company were yelling things across the way. The fire department and emergency services responded, and his leadership arrived, but he would not let them up until I finally convinced him to come down. I sat on the ledge, prepared to grab him if I had to, terrified he would drag us both off, but he did not. I will never be able to forget that man's voice screaming and crying. It sounded inhuman. Story 45. I went in for a high-risk brain surgery. I have an arteriovenous malformation in the left central part of my brain, specifically involving the basal ganglia and thalamus. There was a 97% chance I would be fine and a 3% chance of stroke or death. If I did not have the surgery, I would have a stroke at some point in my life, and depending on how long it took to get to the hospital, I would likely die. They explained that I would lie on the table while they accessed my brain through the femoral artery. I was on the operating table with my surgeon showing me the 6 spots where they would place embolic material. I had to be awake while they were inside of me. I remember they treated 5 spots, and then everything went black. I had a hemorrhagic stroke and spent 9 days in a coma. When I awoke, I had to relearn how to walk, talk, and sit up. I had aphasia and ataxia. 2018 was not my year. I regained most of my ability to walk, but I still have some foot drop and loss of sensation in parts of my body. Cannot use my right arm, but I am alive. I used to be a commercial and industrial plumber, but I cannot do that anymore. All of this happened when I was 23. I am 30 now. Story 46. Watching a car slam into a concrete barricade at more than 90 miles per hour. I parked my car and ran across the highway to render aid. Yes, I know it was a bad idea, but at the time all I could think of was helping whoever was inside the car. The woman in the passenger seat was struck by the airbag and her face was severely injured. She was hysterical, trying to cry but mostly gurgling. I helped her out of the car and she held on to me, making noises and bleeding heavily. The driver was drunk and somehow uninjured. Story 47. I was at a corporate party and had drunk a lot of alcohol. Afterward, someone offered me marijuana on the rooftop of a tall building. After smoking, I felt that the person I was with intended to end their life by jumping from the rooftop. I panicked and ran back downstairs. When I returned to the party, I collapsed. For the next few hours, people tried to revive me. At times, I had no pulse. When I finally came to my senses the next day, it felt as if my entire life up to that moment had been a dream, including my girlfriend, my job, and my whole existence. After that experience, I could not return to my previous job because I could not shake the feeling that everything had been unreal. Story 48. I woke up in a hospital bed unable to move and learned I had multiple organ failure and had been in a coma for nearly 3 weeks. That was nearly 3 years ago, and I am still dealing with it. Story 49. When I had just turned 13, I got into a lot of trouble at school and with some online activity and backed myself into a corner. The only way I could avoid jail was to go to one of those outdoor boys programs in the woods. I spent 2 years there. The shock, anxiety, and constant threat of physical abuse were intense. I realized I had zero control and just had to survive and stay under the radar. It gave me a couple of niche gifts, but it probably did more damage. That approach should be reserved for a specific type of child, and even then it needs to be entirely reworked and come from a caring place, not punishment. Story 50. I was raped and molested as a child from about age 6 to 14. I watched my older brother get run over, then backed over and run over again. I was stabbed in the stomach, had to use super glue, and drove 2 hours for help. I have been in several severe vehicle accidents. In one particularly bad crash, a chunk of my earlobe was cut off, all the ribs on my left side were broken, and my jaw was dislocated. I woke up to a bear outside my tent, was chased by a moose, attacked by several rattlesnakes, and stalked by a mountain lion. Most people are in shock when I tell them my life story. Others do not believe it. I do not really care either way. My body hurts as a 35-year-old, and I have the scars to prove it. There is a running joke in my family that I cannot die. I can get severely injured, but I never seem to die. Story 51. I thought my daughter had died during childbirth. Fortunately, she did not. She is completely healthy. The experience still haunts me from time to time. For clarification, she was not actually in grave danger. They had to use a suction cup to help her, and it slipped off with a smacking sound halfway through. My heart stopped because my mind immediately went from, "This is fine," to "something terrible happened." Although the situation resolved quickly, it was one of the few things I was not prepared for, and it left a mark. Story 52. I had just bought a new car, and in the first week I was almost in a serious crash. It was early, so the school zone lights were active. Where I lived in the mountains, the hills were high enough that I could not see all the cars around me. I was driving 35 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. I saw a flash of red. Behind me, then beside me, then in front. It was an old red Subaru that was now perpendicular to me and began to roll. The car flipped twice, slid down the side of the hill, through a guardrail, and smashed into a small concrete culvert. I stopped, thinking he would need help. Instead, a drug-addled man climbed out and screamed while covered in blood. I called 911 and tried to keep him from running back onto the highway. Thankfully, some large men stopped because they thought he had hit me. I was okay, so they wrestled him to the ground. The police arrived. He screamed that I had cut him off, but several eyewitnesses had seen him driving erratically and one had witnessed the wreck. Coupled with his behavior, he was taken to the hospital and then to jail. Scared me badly, and I have had a lot of anxiety about driving since then. Story 53. Postpartum psychosis felt like a real-life horror movie for about 5 months. I never harmed my child, and I never wanted to. I did harm myself, though. Story 54. I saw the body of my boyfriend after a car accident. He died quickly. I will never forget how his eyes looked. Story 55. Almost a year ago, I spent the day taking my 1-year-old son to the playground. Later that night, I wondered why Mom had not texted me all day. We were truly best friends. We called multiple times a day and were always texting. I took my son to her place at night, knocked on the door and received no answer. I entered the apartment, went into her bedroom, and found her face down on the floor, ice cold. I let out a shriek when the paramedics gave me the look that she was gone. I will never be the same, and I cannot get the image out of my mind. I always wonder what I was doing the second she took her last breath, and I will never forgive myself for not being there. Story 56. I was miscarrying a pregnancy. I was at work when I started hemorrhaging. I had miscarried weeks earlier and still had not passed any tissue. I was with a patient when I felt blood start coming out of me. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and bled everywhere. I knew I needed to get to the hospital. I asked my coworkers if anyone could drive me, but they all told me I could do it myself and sent me out. Thankfully, I made it to the hospital. I got out of my car and looked at my driver's seat to see a pool of blood on the seat leaking onto the whole driver's side door. I called the emergency room and told them I was bleeding in the parking lot, having an active miscarriage, and needed a nurse to bring a wheelchair or I would leave a trail of blood going in. The nurse seemed skeptical but still came out with a wheelchair. She quickly started running once she saw how much blood was pooling around me. They took me in just as my boyfriend arrived from work and tried to stop the bleeding. I heard a doctor tell another that I would not make it if I did not go to surgery immediately. They told my boyfriend and me that I needed surgery and I was going right away. As they wheeled me out of the room, I looked back and saw two people with a mop and bucket cleaning blood from the hospital floor. The mops were stained red. I was taken to surgery. My boyfriend and I said goodbye. We did not know if I would come out the other side. He said he watched me all the way until he could not anymore. He was scared it would be the last time he saw me. Thankfully, I woke up okay physically. I was saved by a dilation and curettage procedure, which is now illegal in my state. What is even scarier to me is that if this happened to me today, doctors would refuse to treat me for fear of losing their medical license. Abortion is healthcare. I now have a 1-year-old rainbow baby and am very thankful for the life-saving abortion that saved my life. Story 57. I work in healthcare. Forget the stories that could be written about it. You become desensitized, which has its ups and downs. Story 58. They brought in a 29-year-old woman, 5 months pregnant with twins, who collapsed in her front yard. She was dead before we reached the trauma bay, and they could not revive her. The babies were not viable. They had to tell her 13-year-old daughter and her husband that she had died. They did not close the door to the family room all the way. The entire emergency department heard their screams. I still hear them sometimes. I was told to move on to my next patient. I worked in healthcare for about 10 years. I do not remember how many people I have watched die, but I remember their families. Story 59. I rappelled down through a suspended ceiling onto the body of a tenant who had been dead for days to unlock the door. It was over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The smell was overpowering and the body was bloated. He had overdosed. We were kind of friends. I had helped him off the streets and had hoped for the best for him. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.